March 3, 1839, Bayou La Fourche, Louisiana. A cold dawn creeping over the canebrake fields. Air wet as breath, sky the color of gunmetal. Somewhere a rooster shouts against the fog. Somewhere else a man sharpens steel against stone. His name is Solomon. Solomon, the man whose name the ledgers tried to erase. Solomon, who would be whispered about for decades after the day the cane fields ran red. He was 32 years old. Born into bondage in Pointe-Coupée Parish, transferred as property twice before his 12th birthday. 5 feet 10, shoulders corded from years of cutting cane. Skin dark as the wet earth, eyes the pale brown of river silt. He had a scar above his right wrist from a broken yoke, another across his ribs from an overseer's whip. Solomon's hands had learned to move silent and fast, a cutter's hands, but inside he carried a patience that no overseer could break. They called the tool a sickle. They called it for harvest, for reaping cane and rice. But Solomon knew, like all who cut under the sun, that the sickle was really a crescent blade, a half moon waiting for its full shadow. Not because he wanted it that way, but because history had pressed him into a corner where silence and steel spoke louder than prayer. Around him the plantation stretched like a green ocean, stalks whispering as dawn breezed through. There were the cabins, low and gray, the cookhouse with its sour-sweet smell of molasses and salt pork, the big house on the rise, white-painted wood with shutters the color of dried moss. And there were the overseers, Amos Keene, John Baptiste, Randall Thorne, Isaac McGraw, Caleb Hurst, Benjamin Levert, Elijah Dupré, and Silas Wren. 8 men. 8 names Solomon repeated to himself at night like a bitter psalm. They said Amos Keene could spot a bent stalk from 50 yards. They said Randall Thorne carried a whip braided from rawhide and copper wire. They said Silas Wren enjoyed making boys run barefoot across oyster shells. These were not rumors. These were the daily facts of Solomon's world. Before the sun rose, the field hands lined up for rationed bread and chicory, sweat already forming along their backs. Overseers barking about quotas, calling names. Solomon stood among them, his head bowed just enough to hide his eyes. He didn't cry. He just listened. He remembered every tone, every word, every crack of the whip. In the cane barns, rats rustled under the planks, the smell of old sugar and animal musk. Solomon's sickle leaned against the wall, blade nicked but still bright. He had sharpened it the night before, slow and deliberate, stone sliding against steel like a whisper. Not because he liked the work, because he had learned patience from the river itself, slow water-carving stone. No one knew yet that he was changing. That something had shifted after the last beating of a boy named Samuel, 15 years old, who had stumbled in the row and been lashed until his back looked like split cane. No one noticed the way Solomon's shoulders squared, or the way he started sleeping less, walking at night, memorizing patterns of guard shifts and moonlight. This is the true story of Solomon, the man the archives called property, but whose name became a warning, a ghost, a question. What happens when patience runs out? What happens when silence breaks? Before we continue with the video, drop a comment telling us where you're from and what time it is over there. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because tonight we are going back to Bayou La Fourche, to the dawn when the overseers thought they owned the fields and one man decided otherwise. The air on March 3rd tastes of iron and wet grass. Cicadas begin their low tremor even before the sun lifts. The cabins empty like spilled grain. Women tying headscarves, men stretching fingers stiff from sleep. The sound of cane knives, the creak of wagon wheels. Overseer Amos Keene pacing with his whip looped at his hip, tapping it against his boot like a drummer testing skin. Solomon sees all this. His eyes flick from face to face. He notices where each overseer stands, how they spread out, where their pistols hang. He breathes through his nose, smell of sweat, of wood smoke, of molasses fermenting in the vats. Somewhere a baby cries, somewhere a dog barks chained. He thinks of Samuel again. He thinks of his mother, dead at 27, buried in an unmarked plot near the bayou edge. He thinks of his father, sold south in 1821, name lost. He thinks of the promise he once whispered to himself, "If I live, I will outlast them. If I cannot outlast them, I will outface them." And now here, dawn rolling up like a curtain, that promise feels like a drumbeat in his chest. One for Samuel, one for mother, one for father. One for every lash across his back. The overseers think they see everything, but they don't see Solomon's hands flex on the sickle handle. They don't see how his breathing slows, how the fog veils his outline. They don't see history bending around him like the bayou bends around cypress roots. A crow lifts from the field, black wings cutting the sky. The sound of its call cuts through the morning like a blade. Solomon lifts his head. For a moment, the sun touches the edge of the horizon. A red coin. Paired glints off the sickle blade, just a flicker. Then it's gone. By midday, there will be rumors. By nightfall, there will be blood on the river. But right now, in this narrow slip of time, Solomon is just a man among men, standing in the dew, waiting for something that has been waiting for him too. The plantation had never been so still. Not because work had stopped, but because time itself was holding its breath. Solomon remembered every detail, the smell of chicory, the grit of soil between his toes, the sound of Amos Keene clearing his throat. He remembered and he filed it away, because memory is a weapon too. 8 overseers, 8 names, 8 mornings of cruelty stacked upon years. The sickle wasn't for Cain anymore. It was for something older, something deeper, something the overseers would never understand until it touched their skin. And as the sky lightened, Solomon thought of fire, blood, and silence, the 3 things that never lie. Long before the dawn at Bayou La Fourche, there were other dawns. Long before the sickle flashed like a second sun, there were other mornings of mud and hunger and silence. Solomon's story doesn't start in 1839. It starts with a boy holding his mother's hand on a levee in 1817, watching men load sugar barrels onto a flatboat, wondering if he too would one day be shipped like freight. His mother's name was Ada. Say it, Ada. Ada, who sang in a low voice while she washed clothes in the bayou. Ada, who pressed his head against her knee when the whip cracked nearby. Ada, who told him once, "Don't let them break your eyes, child." Her eyes were the color of tea steeped too long. She had a crooked finger from an old injury, and she traced it across his forehead like a blessing. Solomon's father was called Joseph. Joseph, who could repair any plow. Joseph, who was sold when Solomon was 10, carried south to Mississippi. They called it a transfer. Ada called it breaking the spine of our house. Joseph's absence was a hole that never closed. Solomon remembered every word of that day, the shouts, the rope. His father's eyes fixed on him as the wagon rolled away. The plantation ledger wrote, "Property moved." Solomon wrote it on his heart, "Father gone." Years passed. Ada died of fever when Solomon was 14. He dug her grave himself, the earth wet and black, cypress roots coiling like snakes. He marked the spot with a shard of blue glass from a broken bottle. To this day, he can see that glint of blue whenever he closes his eyes. Ada, Joseph, Samuel, names like stones in a pocket. After Ada's death, Solomon learned the overseers' patterns. He learned to keep his head down, to let their insults slide over him like rain over rock. But he also learned the weight of their habits. Amos Keene's early patrol, Randall Thorne's love of drink at midday, Silas Wren's habit of turning his back at the barn door. These were not just details. These were openings, fissures, cracks. One evening in 1831, Randall Thorne accused Solomon of stealing molasses. He dragged him to the whipping post, tied his wrists above his head. The lash fell 13 times. "Count," Thorne barked. Solomon did not count. He did not cry. He just listened to the cane frogs in the ditch, their low croak steady as a drumbeat. He remembered every stroke. 13. Later, alone in the cabin, he traced the welts with his fingers and whispered, "One day." There was a girl once, Mary Ellen. She worked in the kitchens. She knew how to smuggle scraps of sweet bread in her apron. They would meet at the edge of the fields, where the cypress knees rose from the swamp like knuckled fists. She told him she dreamed of New Orleans, of a room with curtains, of music spilling from the street. In 1834, she was assaulted by Silas Wren. She bled for days. By the time she rose again, her eyes had gone quiet. She stopped singing. Within a year, she was dead. They called it fever. Solomon called it what it was, murder without a knife. He remembered Mary Ellen's laugh. He remembered the way she tucked her hair behind her ear. He remembered how she said his name, Solomon, like a bell ringing in the distance. One for Mary Ellen, one for Ada, one for Joseph, one for Samuel. Names like a litany now. Every winter the cane fields burned. They called it clearing. But to Solomon it looked like a ritual sacrifice. Stalks turned to black ash, air heavy with sweet smoke. He would stand at the edge of the flames, watching sparks drift upward like souls. Fire, blood, and silence. He learned these were the three truths of the world. In 1836, a boy named Samuel came from Natchez, 15 years old. He had a gap between his front teeth and a nervous habit of humming under his breath. Solomon took him under his wing, taught him how to cut cane without slicing his fingers. For 3 years, they shared rations, shared jokes, shared silence. Then came the whipping, the one that cracked Samuel's back open for a stumble in the row. Solomon watched it happen, his fists clenched around the sickle handle. That night, Samuel could barely breathe. 2 days later, he was gone, buried at the edge of the field with no marker. Samuel's death was not the first. It was just the one that snapped the last thread. Because Samuel had reminded Solomon of himself, of the boy he had been holding Ada's hand. Because Samuel had hummed songs that Ada used to hum. Because Samuel's eyes had not yet gone quiet. The promise was simple now. It had begun as survival, turned into a vow, and now was something colder, sharper. Not revenge for the sake of revenge. Justice for the sake of the dead. Not because he wanted to, but because silence had become unbearable. In the cabins at night, he began carving lines into the wood near his pallet. One for Ada, one for Joseph, one for Mary Ellen, one for Samuel. The wood became a calendar of grief, a ledger of loss. Each mark a tally, each tally a seed. He trained his body without anyone noticing, lifting heavier bundles, walking longer distances, testing his grip on the sickle until his calluses felt like leather. He trained his eyes to see in low light, memorizing the color of dawn before anyone else woke. He trained his mind to stillness, to patience. They called him quiet. They called him docile. They called him invisible. He let them. Sometimes late at night, he would take the sickle from the barn and polish it with a rag, dipped in ash and oil. The blade caught the moonlight like a frozen river. "They think it's for Cain," he whispered once, "but it's for memory. 8 overseers, 8 lives standing between him and the ghosts who walked beside him every day. Amos Keene, John Batista, Randall Thorne, Isaac McGraw, Caleb Hurst, Benjamin Levert, Elijah Dupre, Silas Wren." He said their names as he polished the blade, each name a stroke. Not because he believed it would bring them back, because the act of saying their names kept him from disappearing himself. Every Sunday sermon spoke of patience, of heavenly justice. Solomon listened, but the words fell like dust. Heaven felt far away. The only justice he had ever seen came from the earth itself. Roots breaking stone, water wearing down banks, fire consuming fields. Nature took its time, but it never forgot. And so Solomon began to think like the bayou, slow, deep, patient, inevitable. Not a lightning strike, a rising tide. The past wounds were not just scars, so they were instructions. They were coordinates on a map, leading to a single dawn. He did not draw the map. History drew it for him, but he read it. He followed it, step by step, mark by mark, memory by memory. By the time winter 1838 turned to spring 1839, Solomon had become 2 men, the one they saw and the one who stood apart inside him, silent and ready. The second man was a shadow with a sickle in his hand. The second man was not cruel, but he was merciless. Fire, blood, and silence. These words became his heartbeat. The sickle was no longer just a tool. It was a metronome counting down the days. And when he lay down to sleep, Ada's voice came back to him. "Don't let them break your eyes." He hadn't. His eyes were fixed on dawn. Spring of 1839 came warm and wet. Rains swelled the bayou until cypress roots disappeared beneath black water. Frogs sang like broken flutes, mosquitoes thick as smoke. The cane stood taller than a man now, green spears swaying under clouds of gnats. To most it was just another planting season. To Solomon it was a clock ticking. Each raindrop a second, each dawn a drumbeat. On February 28th, 5 days before the dawn that would pass into whispers, an incident shifted everything from vow to action. Overseer Randall Thorne accused an elderly woman named Claudine of slowing the row. He threw her basket into the mud and struck her with the flat of his blade. Claudine fell, her back bent like a snapped reed. The others kept their eyes on the ground. Solomon didn't. He saw the way her hands trembled, saw the red mark blooming across her neck. He heard the tiny sound she made when she tried to stand. He didn't cry. He just watched. He remembered every detail. The sun on Thorne's hat brim, the color of the mud on his boots, the way Claudine whispered Lord under her breath. That night, Solomon sat outside the cabin under a moon hazed by clouds. His hands clasped, his heart steady. Fireflies flickered over the swamp like embers. He thought of Ada. He thought of Samuel. He thought of Mary Ellen. He thought of Claudine still on her mat, back twisted. One for each, one for every lash. The breaking point wasn't rage, it was clarity. Not because he wanted to kill, because he had run out of ways to live without answering. Because silence had become a coffin, because memory had sharpened itself into a blade. He began moving differently. Before dawn, he walked the fields alone under pretense of checking tools. He learned which cabins had loose boards. He learned where the dogs slept and where their chains reached. He watched how Amos Keene rotated patrols, how Silas Wren took his breakfast separate from the others. He noticed the guns were locked at night, but left hanging on hooks at dawn. No one suspected. They still called him quiet, docile, invisible. They still thought his eyes were downcast. They didn't see how he was already halfway gone, living in another timeline where dawn meant reckoning. In the barn, he sharpened the sickle, but now each stroke was deliberate. Stone against steel, whisper against whisper. Not for Cain, he murmured. For memory. The sound of sharpening became a heartbeat. He oiled the handle with lard to keep it from splintering. He wrapped a strip of cloth around the grip to stop it slipping. Practical things that looked like ordinary maintenance. When he lifted the blade, the edge caught moonlight. In it, he saw the reflection of Ada's eyes, Samuel's smile, Mary Ellen's hand. They stared back at him from the steel. He nodded once. Not because he sought approval, because he was already past asking. The nights grew shorter. The dawns came faster. His body adjusted to waking at the first bird call, his pulse slow and steady. He ate little, saving rations to keep his mind sharp. He spoke less, listening more. Silence became a weapon, honed and ready. In his dreams, fire crept through the cane again the way it did every winter. Only now he stood in the flames and they did not burn him. They wrapped him like a cloak. He woke with sweat on his neck, the smell of ash still in his nose. Fire, blood, silence. The three truths. 3 days before, he walked to the edge of the bayou at night. Water black as tar, cypress knees jutting like bones. He knelt and dipped his hand in, felt the coolness run over his skin. Ada, he whispered. Joseph, Mary Ellen, Samuel. The water carried their names away like offerings. He straightened, wiped his hand on his shirt, and stared at the reflection of the moon rippling, a sickle of light floating on black water. 2 days before, he found Claudine again. She lay curled on her mat, still breathing shallowly. He placed a rag of cool water on her forehead. She looked up at him, eyes cloudy. You can't fix it, she whispered. He said nothing. But inside something answered. I can answer it. Not fix, answer. The night before, he did not sleep. He sat in the corner of the cabin, sickle across his knees. Outside, the frogs and crickets played their endless, trembling song. Inside, the others turned in restless sleep. He watched the walls, the shadows, the faint glint of dawn rising somewhere far beyond the horizon. They called it order. But it was really terror. They called it discipline. But it was really cruelty. They called it property. But it was really people. They called it a sickle for Cain. But it was really a crescent of justice waiting to swing. He thought of Samuel's back breaking. He thought of Ada's grave with its blue glass shard. He thought of Mary Ellen's quiet eyes. He thought of Claudine's bent body. One for each, one for every lash. At some point, the names stopped being a list. They became a rhythm. Ada, Joseph, Mary Ellen, Samuel, Claudine. Ada, Joseph, Mary Ellen, Samuel, Claudine, like a heartbeat, like a drum. Dawn approached, the last dawn before the dawn. The air smelled of wet grass and metal. The sky a thin gray band. Birds stirring, a dog coughing on its chain. He rose. The sickle felt lighter now, almost an extension of his arm. He wrapped it in a rag and slid it under his shirt. He did not think of himself as a killer. He thought of himself as a witness carrying testimony from the dead. Not because he wanted because blood had already been taken, spilled, wrung from every corner of their lives. This was not the first spilling. It was the answering echo. When he walked into the field that morning, no one noticed anything different. He bent with the others, cut cane with the others. The overseers barked as usual, names snapping through the air. But under the surface, time had shifted. Under the surface, something was already underway. A crow landed on a fence post, black wings folding. Its eye fixed on him. The wind pressed against his back. He breathed in slow, let it fill him, let it clear him. He was no longer thinking of if, only when. He remembered Ada's words, "Don't let them break your eyes." He hadn't. His eyes now held the whole horizon. The breaking point was not rage. It was inevitability. Like the river rising until the levee bursts. Like fire creeping through the cane until the field is ash. Like silence so deep it cracks under its own weight. When the sun rose that last time, its light was thin and red. It caught on the blade under his shirt. 8 names pulsed in his mind. Amos Keene, John Batiste, Randall Thorne, Isaac McGraw, Caleb Hurst, Benjamin Levert, Elijah Dupre, Silas Wren. He had memorized their steps, their patterns, their habits. He did not need to plan anymore. He was the plan, fire, blood, and silence. He whispered the words as the sky opened. Not a prayer, a statement. And in that moment, as the work bell clanged and the overseers spread across the rows, Solomon felt no tremor in his hands. He felt calm. He felt ready. He felt the world tilt just slightly toward balance. Dawn again, March 3rd, 1839. The sky is iron and rose. The fog is a low animal crawling across the cane. The ground drinks dew like blood. Everything smells of wet hay and rust. Somewhere a bell clangs, metal on metal, summoning hands to the rows. Somewhere else a whip cracks against empty air. A warning shot. Solomon stands among the workers, sickle under his shirt, heart steady. Auda's name in his mouth. Joseph's name in his mouth. Mary Ellen, Samuel, Claudine. The names move with his breath. They are his rhythm now. Amos Keene paces the line, boots sinking into mud, his voice a rough bark cutting the mist. Randall Thorne lights a pipe, the smell of cheap tobacco drifting over cane tips. Silas Wren swings his whip like a pendulum. 8 overseers. 8 moving shadows in the fog. The cane blades whisper. The sky bleeds pale light. A crow circles above, calling once, twice. Solomon's hands flex around the sickle handle under the cloth. Not because of fear, because of memory, because of inevitability. They called it harvest, but it was really hunger. They called it labor, but it was really theft. They called it discipline, but it was really terror. And now what they called control was about to become silence. He moves without a signal, not because a clock struck, because a tide rose. He steps out of the line and into the fog, sliding between stalks. The cane cuts his forearms, leaving thin, wet lines. He does not flinch. He has memorized the pattern. Amos Keene always checks the far fence first. Silas Wren lingers by the barn door. Randall Thorne walks the outer rows. One by one, like beads on a string. From the cabins, a rooster crows. Dogs bark once, then go silent. Even the insects seem to dim their song. The field feels like a church before the first hymn. Somewhere in the fog, a sound like steel on stone. A gasp. Then nothing. This is how it begins, not with a shout, but with a sudden absence of sound. Solomon moves like water through the rows. Cane stalks sway shut behind him, his breathing steady, his eyes fixed ahead. He thinks of Ada's grave. He thinks of Samuel's bent body. He thinks of Mary Ellen's quiet eyes, fire, blood, silence. He emerges near the fence where Amos Keene stands. The overseer turns, mouth opening for a word that never comes. The fog swallows his voice. The crow above gives a harsh cry. The sickle arcs once, a whisper through air. We don't see. We hear the breath go out. We hear a thump against wet ground. We see sugarcane tremble as something heavy falls among the stalks. Solomon steps back into the fog. The crow wheels and cries again, one for Ada. He moves on deeper into the field where Randall Thorne walks the outer rows. Thorne's pipe ember glows red. He raises it to his mouth, squinting at the fog. A shape slides toward him. We hear the sickle again, not slicing cane, but air. We hear a gasp, a gurgle, then the pipe drops into the mud, ember hissing out. The cane rustles as something slumps to the earth. One for Joseph. The workers in the distance keep cutting cane, heads down. They hear only the bell, the wind, the whip. They don't see the fog folding in, taking overseers one by one. Solomon wipes his hand on his shirt. Not blood, dew, fog memory. He steps over a discarded hat, boot prints filling with water. The sickle glints once, then disappears again into shadow. He finds Silas Wren near the barn, whip coiled at his side. Wren spits on the ground, adjusts his belt. Behind him, the barn door creaks. Solomon waits, breathing slow, silence like a held note. Then movement, swift, close. The whip falls from Wren's hand. His eyes go wide. He reaches for his throat, but the fog closes around him. A soft sound like a breath leaving. His knees buckle. He collapses against the barn wall, leaving a dark smear sliding downward. One for Mary Ellen. Inside the barn, rats scurry under the planks. Outside, the cane stands unmoved, green and whispering. The sky now brightening, streaks of gold piercing mist. 3 overseers down, 5 remain. The plantation has never been so still. Not because work has stopped, but because the air itself is holding its breath. Solomon moves back into the field, passing workers who don't dare lift their eyes. 1 or 2 glimpse him, sickle glinting, cloth dark against his shirt. They turn away. Later they will tell the story in hushed tones of how he moved like a shadow, how the fog became his ally. Elijah Dupre stands near the irrigation ditch, boots planted, looking out at the cane. He hears something behind him, a crunch of wet grass. He turns, frowning. We hear the sickle again. We see a hat fly from his head. We see his hands grasp at air. We hear water splash as something falls into the ditch. Then only ripples, 1 for Samuel. Solomon pauses, looking down at the water. He sees his own reflection rippling, a sickle of light on black surface. He remembers dipping his hand in days before. He remembers whispering their names. He whispers now: Ada, Joseph, Mary Ellen, Samuel, Claudine. The fog thins a little, revealing patches of blue sky. The workers sense something but keep moving, hands trembling on their knives. Dogs bark again, a nervous bark, then whine. Benjamin Levert is next, sitting on a fence rail near the road, chewing a straw, pistol on his hip. He sees movement in the cane and straightens. "Who's there?" he calls. His voice breaks the quiet like a thrown stone. We hear the sickles whisper. We see straw drift from his mouth. We see his pistol slip from his belt into the mud. We hear boots scrape wood, then nothing. 1 for Claudine, 5 gone. 3 remain. The bell rings again from the big house, calling for the overseers to change shifts. No one answers. Solomon walks through the rows, sickle low, eyes calm. He does not run. He does not look back. He moves like someone walking home. Fire, blood, and silence. He repeats the words under his breath. Not a prayer. A fact. The cane rustles around him. Birds take flight from the ditches. A wind picks up, carrying the smell of molasses, iron, and wet earth. 8 names. He has spoken 5. 3 left. The plantation had never been so quiet. Not because it was empty, because history itself had entered the field, walking on 2 feet, carrying a sickle. The fog begins to tear like old cloth. Slats of sunlight push down through the cane. A crow wheels once more and flies toward the river. Somewhere a baby cries from a cabin. Somewhere else a pot clangs. Life goes on in its motions, but beneath, something irrevocable has already happened. 3 names remain. Isaac McGraw, Caleb Hurst, John Baptiste. Solomon moves through the field, slower now, each step heavy with the echo of the last. The sickle at his side glows dull silver, dew dripping from its edge. His shirt clings to his back. The air smells of iron and green sap, of molasses and mud. His heartbeat is steady. Ada, Joseph, Mary Ellen, Samuel, Claudine. He finds Isaac McGraw near the horse pen, checking tack, head bent over a buckle. McGraw mutters to himself, humming a fragment of a tune. He senses something and glances up. The sun catches his face. In the reflection of his eyes, a figure behind him. A whisper of movement, a shape. We don't see the act. We see his hands rise, then open. We hear the sound of leather dropping to dirt. We hear a soft thud, then the creak of fence rails as weight slumps against them. The horses snort, shifting, stamping at the smell of something unfamiliar. 1 for Ada. Solomon steps back, wiping his palm on his trousers. His eyes flick once toward the cabins. No one there, only the sound of insects. only the slow drip of water from the eaves. He turns, vanishes into the cane. Caleb Hurst is on the levee near the sugar sheds counting barrels. He wears a wide hat, a pistol tucked at the back of his belt. He chews a piece of sugarcane, spitting fibers into the mud. He looks out at the water, squinting against the glare. A breeze stirs his shirt. Behind him, cane rustles. A figure emerges, low, steady, the sound of a sickle sliding free from cloth. Hurst half turns. His mouth opens, but the wind takes the sound. We see the pistol slip. We hear the splash as something falls to the bank. The sugar barrels stand like silent witnesses, one for Joseph. Now only John Baptiste remains. The oldest overseer, a Creole from upriver, known for his quiet cruelty. He walks the edge of the quarters, stick tapping against his boot. His eyes narrowed, scanning the fields. Maybe he has noticed the others gone. Maybe the silence has reached him. Solomon watches from shadow, his breathing deep, slow. The sickle heavy now, not from use but from the weight of memory. He thinks of Mary Ellen, of Samuel, of Ada's crooked finger, of the shard of blue glass. He thinks of the line carved into cabin wood. This is the last line. Baptiste pauses by the well. He bends to draw water, rope squealing over pulley. The bucket rises, dripping. He cups his hands to drink. The water reflects the sky, a pale sickle of sun. We don't see the act. We hear the bucket tip. We hear a gasp. We hear the rope snap against wood. We see the bucket spill water, darkening earth. We see a hat roll stopping against a stone. Then only the rope swaying, creaking. One for Mary Ellen, one for Samuel. One for all of them. Solomon steps back. The well rope creaks again, slower, then stops. The crow circles once overhead, silent now. 8 names, 8 shadows in the fog. 8 silences where once there were voices barking orders. He stands for a moment, eyes closed, sickle hanging at his side. His hands tremble not with fear but with release. His chest rises, falls. The cane around him whispers, almost like applause, almost like mourning. He looks up at the sky. Clouds part, a strip of blue. For a moment he imagines Ada's face there, Mary Ellen's smile, Samuel's humming. He imagines Joseph's hand on his shoulder. He imagines Claudine standing upright again. For a moment he imagines himself free. Then the noise begins. Shouts from the big house, dogs barking in a frenzy, a rider galloping from the far edge of the field. Someone has found a body or a hat, or simply noticed the silence. The plantation's normal rhythm breaks like a rope snapping. Solomon straightens. He wipes the sickle on the rag and slips it back under his shirt. He begins walking toward the river, slow, steady. Not running, walking. Behind him workers scatter, some toward cabins, some deeper into the cane. Some drop to their knees and pray. The dog's barking grows nearer. Horses whinny. A bell clangs again and again. Panic now instead of order. He reaches the edge of the bayou where the cypress knees rise like knuckles. He crouches, dips the sickle into the black water, rinses it. Red swirls away into darkness. He watches it drift, then vanish. Fire, blood, silence. The words rise in his mind, steady as ever. He breathes them out. Not a boast, a litany. Behind him, riders shouting. Hooves thudding. The crack of a gunshot somewhere, stray and blind. Another shot. The air smells of smoke. He steps into the water up to his knees. The mud sucks at his feet. He looks across the bayou at the far bank, at the cypress dripping moss. He knows he cannot swim far. He knows the riders are coming, but he also knows the 8 names have been answered. He turns once to look back at the fields, the sun now fully above the horizon, spilling gold over cane tips. In the distance, shapes running, guns raised, dogs streaking ahead. But between them and him lies the water, black and wide. He thinks of Ada's words, "Don't let them break your eyes." He smiles, just barely. His eyes are unbroken. He takes another step into the bayou, sickle still in hand. The water rises to his waist. His shirt clings. The current tugs. The sounds behind him grow louder. A bullet slaps into the water nearby, throwing up a spray. Another hisses past. Dogs barking, men shouting. But to him it sounds far away, muffled. He whispers their names one last time: Ada, Joseph, Mary Ellen, Samuel, Claudine, Amos Keene, Randall Thorne, Silas Wren, Elijah Dupree, Benjamin Levert, Isaac McGraw, Caleb Hurst, John Batista. A whole ledger spoken aloud, no longer silent. He closes his eyes. The sun on his face. the current around his legs, the sickle floating in his palm. The water clutches at his waist, then his chest. Cypress knees pierce the surface like crooked teeth. Spanish moss hangs low, gray and silent. The bayou smells of damp wood, fish oil, old iron. Solomon feels the current turning, pulling, as if the river itself knows his name. Behind him, hooves slash mud. Dogs' throats rip the air with sound. A man shouts, "There!" Another shouts, "Shoot!" The plantation, still waking to its morning, now spins on a new axis. 8 overseers silent, a world inverted. A shot cracks. Water jumps near his shoulder. He takes another step. The sickle drifts in his palm, then slips beneath the surface, vanishing into blackness. He doesn't reach for it. It is finished. The tool wasn't for cutting cane. It was for carving memory into history. It has done its work. Another bullet. He dives, the water closing over his head. Darkness, silt rising. The world muted. His lungs burn. He surfaces under the shadow of a low cypress limb, clinging to its bark, breathing hard. He can smell the powder drifting on the breeze. They don't cry. They just load. Dogs splash into the shallows. A rider pulls his horse short, pistol raised. A man shouts, "Bring him back alive." Another shouts, "No, kill him." Their voices echo across the water. Solomon turns. His eyes meet theirs across the bayou. For a heartbeat, no one moves. Time holds. Then he lets go of the limb. The current takes him. He drifts sideways into deeper water, away from the plantation edge, away from the barking dogs. He hears their shouts fading, drowned by the hum of cicadas, the rush of blood in his ears. He didn't cry. He just moved. Some say they caught him downstream, tangled in roots, his body riddled with shot. Some say he vanished into the swamp, guided by maroons hidden in the trees. Some say he made it north, changed his name, lived as a freedman until the war. The records vanish, the papers shredded or burned. All that remains is a cluster of oral histories, a handful of names carved in wood. What is certain is that after that dawn, Belchane plantation never returned to normal. The owners sold it off in parcels. The sugar shed rotted. The quarters emptied. The overseers' graves were dug under cypress shade, unmarked except for stones. Workers whispered the story like a spell. Solomon walked at dawn. Mothers used it to quiet children. Stay good, or Solomon will come. But under the warning there was a tremor of awe. The legend spread downriver, upriver, across parishes. In New Orleans, free black dock workers told it as they loaded barrels. In Baton Rouge, a preacher worked Solomon's name into a sermon about Exodus. By 1841, abolitionist pamphlets in Boston carried a garbled version, the Louisiana Avenger. It became less a man, more a shape in the fog, more a question than an answer. Fire, blood, silence. The words etched themselves into the memory of a region. Some white newspapers painted him as a monster. Some black newspapers, much later, would call him a freedom fighter. The truth sits between a man pressed beyond human endurance, who turned the tools of his bondage into a weapon of refusal. In the decades after, the cane still grew, overseers still barked, but something in the mythos had shifted. Young men whispered of Sickles and dawn. Women sewed little pieces of blue glass into hems as charms. An old man in 1865 told a Union officer, Solomon was the first drumbeat of the war. His name repeated like a drum. Solomon, Solomon, Solomon. Not because he was saint or demon, but because he was a man who decided. Time markers shift. The Civil War ends. Emancipation declared. Sugar still cut, now by sharecroppers instead of the enslaved. Belchane's main house collapses under a hurricane in 1887. The cypress well fills with silt. Tourists in the 1920s drive past without knowing. But the old ones remember. They still whisper his name under their breath, as if it can open a door to air. We're left with fragments. A broken sickle dredged from the bayou in 1954. A line carved into cabin wood, saved in a museum in Lafayette. A faded page from an overseer's ledger, blank after 1839. Oral recordings from the 1930s WPA interviews. He walked at dawn. He walked with silence. 8 of them gone. He vanished into water. What remains is a shape at the edge of history, moving through fog, carrying all the names of the lost. Before we continue, drop a comment telling us where you're from and what time it is there. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. This is the true story of Solomon, the slave of Louisiana who became something more than a man, something more than a headline. His story is not because of the blood, it is because of the memory. He remembered every name, every wound, and he carved that memory into history at dawn. His legacy is resistance not as speech, but as action. His legacy is silence turned into thunder. His legacy is the possibility, whispered from one generation to the next, that a man at the bottom of the world can still rise, can still choose. Fire, blood, silence. Those three words, repeated like footsteps, still echo through the cane fields at first light. If this story stirs you, it's because it speaks of the seam between desperation and dignity, between cruelty and consequence, because it reminds us how thin the line can be between tool and weapon, between order and revolt, between one dawn and the next. Subscribe and share with those who need to hear stories not of saints, but of people who refused. Because history is not clean, because memory is not gentle, because Solomon walked at dawn. The cane fields of Louisiana today look quiet. Long rows straight as lines in a ledger, tractors instead of mules, diesel engines instead of sweat. But if you stand very still at dawn, if the fog is heavy enough, you can almost hear it. A breath in the mist, a footstep on wet earth, a name whispered on the wind. Historians drive past Belchain's old boundaries without knowing. GPS pins mark a wildlife refuge now. Cypress and willow have claimed the ditches. Yet under the soil lie traces of the cabins, bits of iron, pottery shards. Under the soil lies a story etched in blood and silence. Visitors ask, is it true? Was there really a man named Solomon who cut a path through his overseers? Was it myth or warning or prayer? The archives are patchwork. Plantation ledgers contradict oral histories. Census records omit names, but across 100 miles of river parish, old people still recall their grandparents whispering the same phrase, "He walked at dawn." Case Closed TV doesn't trade in ghosts. We don't claim supernatural echoes, but we do claim memory, and memory, especially when it belongs to the dispossessed, often hides in the cracks of official records. It survives not as a headline but as a rhythm, a story, a name said over and over until it becomes a heartbeat. We look at a sickle today and see a museum piece, a farming relic. In 1839 it was an extension of the hand, a crescent blade that cut sweet stalks. But the sickle wasn't for cutting cane. It was for survival. It was for remembrance. It was for drawing a line no one thought could be drawn. Solomon's story stands not as an instruction, but as an interruption. It interrupts the narrative of total submission. It interrupts the idea that bondage erases choice. It interrupts the silence forced on generations. It does not make him a hero or a monster. It makes him human, and therefore dangerous to those who would write only one version of the past. Not because violence redeems, but because violence remembered changes how we see power. Not because revenge restores, but because revenge recorded exposes the wound. The modern sugar industry runs on machines, on spreadsheets, on contracts. But its roots, literal and historical, are in fields worked by people whose names rarely appear on the profits. Solomon's name carved into a cabin wall is a counterweight to that erasure. A single carved line, a mark of refusal, a fragment of a life that said no. In museums across the South, you can find the artifacts of that world. Chains, whips, ledger books, sickles. But rarely do you find the stories of individuals who fought back, especially those whose fight left bodies instead of petitions. Solomon's story insists on being told even when the records try to smother it. We repeat his name not because we glorify the act, but because the act reveals the cost of denying humanity. We repeat his name to remember Ada, Joseph, Mary Ellen, Samuel, Claudine, all the unnamed whose lives pressed against the edge of endurance. We repeat his name so that when we stand in a field at dawn, we understand the silence is not empty. It is full fire, blood, silence. This is not only the motif of one dawn in 1839. It is the pattern of how history carries trauma forward. Fire burns the records. Blood stains the soil. Silence fills the archives. Only memory breaks it. You watching this now, wherever you are, Lahore, Los Angeles, Lagos, are part of that memory. When you speak a name out loud, when you refuse the clean version of history, you take up that sickle of remembrance. You carve your own line. Before we close, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from and what time it is there. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. This has been the story of Solomon of Louisiana. Not a ghost, not a legend, a man, a dawn, her decision. If this story haunts you, it's because it sits at the crossroads of history and humanity, because it forces us to see not only cruelty, but consequence, not only suffering, but action. Because it leaves us with questions. What would you do at the edge of endurance? What would you remember? The past is not over. It lives in the land, in the air, in the songs people sing under their breath. The cane still grows, the fog still rolls, and sometimes when the first light hits the blade just right, it still glints like a crescent moon, like a sickle waiting in silence. Subscribe and share with those who think history is tidy, because stories like this remind us it is not.